This drum kit is amazing. Short review, I know, but allow me to get a little bit more into it. This is the EFNOTE Pro 703 Power E-Kit. Long title, but badass. 703 Power actually represents this specific layout of drum kit, and there are tons of different layouts for this drum kit, as you can probably see right here. With this setup you get 1 up, 2 down, snare drum, bass drum, hi-hat, all that good stuff. 2 crashes, 1 dark, we'll get into that in a minute, ride cymbal and a china of all things. So let's break this down into some categories. Who is this drum kit for? Having now played this for a little while, it screams gigging / touring professional drummer. Not just because of the very expensive price tag, but because of all the features that come with this. One of the biggest giveaways for who this is actually made for is the huge input and output box that comes with it, that is currently sitting on the floor, that you're not going to look at because of the other thing that comes along with this, which is loads of wires. There are cables absolutely everywhere, and initially I thought this was a downside, and I'm kind of on the fence about it, but when I actually think about it, it's not a bad thing, because you've got cables going literally 2 to each cymbal, 1 to each drum. There's a lot going on, but they are individual cables. So if one goes horribly wrong, then you can just unplug individual cables and you don't have one big massive cable that you've got to unpick and figure out what's happened, which I think is a great thing. But like I said, don't look at the box, look at the drums. The other very subtle thing is that you have to hold the power button for a certain amount of time for the kit to actually turn off. And this might be a feature in other kits, but if you're playing a gig, a really high-end gig especially, the last thing you're going to want to do is accidentally press the power button. So I'm actually really glad that they included that, and again it tells me who this is for. Other people this might work for, content creators such as myself. It's just aesthetically quite nice to look at, and because you've got all the ins and outs you could ever want ever, it makes things like recording or potentially using it for a house kit or maybe in church, it just suits that kind of environment. However, as you can probably see, it's not very space saving, which is originally, to me anyway, one of the big upsides to an E-kit. So again, this isn't really your beginner to put in your flat and make not that much noise kind of kit. Unless of course you want to start your midlife crisis with a bang, in which case go ham, go out and get it. However, if that's not you, then feel free to check out more information about other EFNOTE kits down in the description. And also, before you leave this video, give us a like, helps a girl out. This kit feels fantastic to play. There's no two ways about it. It just feels really good. Something I find interesting about it is the kick drum. Because we've got full shells going on, you actually have a resonating bass drum. You can hear the sustain potentially. And I don't know if this actually affects the sound of the kit whatsoever, but to me it just adds to how convincing this kit feels. It is still a little bit bouncy compared to an actual acoustic bass drum, but if you're coming from just a little pad for your bass drum, then this is a hell of a step up. Helps convince me I'm playing a real kit anyway. Something else that I think really adds to the playability of this and how convincing it is the fact that you've got heads that are big. They actually bounce a bit more like a real acoustic drum would. On other electric kits, other E-kits, especially your cheap ones where the pads are about this big, it's just not going to respond and bounce the same way an acoustic would, or ones with bigger heads such as this. Dynamically, these are also really nicely responsive, especially the cymbals. Oh, we'll get onto the cymbals when I talk about the sounds, but oh, I love the cymbals. They're so good. I'd say that these heads are still slightly more bouncy than a real acoustic kit would be, and I'm tempted to not really mess with detuning these any more than I have, because I feel like they'd start to affect the sensors, but it still feels pretty good. That one's really good, actually. One more thing, just in terms of playability, we've got a separate pad kind of surface for cross stick / rim click sound. I'm still on the fence as to whether this feels necessary or whether it's a benefit or not. I think you do benefit from knowing you're not going to hit the rim of the drum and accidentally get this rim click sound that you don't want. That might be what they're trying to avoid here. But say you wanted to be playing some rim stuff on the snare drum, it is a little bit awkward to get over there to do it. I think that's my only gripe, and that's not even a gripe. That's it. Now on to the important part. How does this drum kit actually sound? The short answer is really, really good, but you probably knew that already. All the sounds are recorded at 24-bit, which means they're just nice and shiny and crisper than the sounds on the other kits, and you can tell the difference. It sounds really good. For me, it just seems to take it to that extra level of convincing. There's only 23 drum kits out of the box, but there is space for 123. So that tells me you must be able to download more sounds / drums. Maybe they will do more recording sessions, or they've already done them. I believe there is an app, and there will be more information about that down below. But in terms of what actually comes out of the box, you can dampen and tune all of these drums, which does give you quite a range of flexibility in terms of adapting the sound, but it is still only 23 kits. So if you're out there hoping for loads and loads and loads to reel through, this probably isn't the kit for you. That being said, the sounds used in these kits are fantastic and high quality, and as a professional drummer you don't need a huge palette to pull from. One downside to this, however, is if you can't download your own samples onto this, you will probably need your own separate sample pad, which I think is quite a big downside if that is so. Especially if this kit is built for touring drummers, because artists will want specific samples. In terms of how else you can adapt the drum sounds you do have straight out of the box, you can also EQ, compress, and put a high pass filter on there. But it doesn't seem like you can do anything like add reverb or maybe even delay or any other effects that you might want to put on there, which I think it would be nice if it was there. I know in most situations when you're playing big live venues, you don't want effects going straight out of your mix bus because it sounds muddy and but you still want the option. I feel like it should still be there, especially when you're paying this much. Currently, this kit is £6,800, so just shy of £7,000. I don't see why you wouldn't put all the bells and whistles in, quite frankly, but I'm sure there is probably a reason they've whittled this down, potentially for ease of use in the interface and while you're actually going through it. Speaking of what you get out the box, I'd say it will take a little bit of tweaking just to get levels where you want them. For example, I found that the cymbals were a bit too loud, but saying that, these cymbals sound fantastic, and I maintain that across all EFNOTE kits. I think they sound awesome. They're super responsive, and also especially when it comes to muting cymbals, it's just so easy. And I like that it seems that they've got something on the inside of the cymbals that is actually vibrating. You can hear a brrr kind of noise on the inside of the cymbal. I don't know how that affects the tech as such, but to me, just something about that helps me. I like it. Speaking of cymbals, every cymbal comes with a bell sensor. So if you've got two cables going from it, you can have bells on everything, basically, minus your china. And including the hi-hat, which I think is a really nice touch. Just a note on sensitivity now. So something I have a personal sensitivity towards is a good snare drum, seeing as you're probably going to be hitting it a lot. And this is quite sensitive. I can play quietly enough that it doesn't pick up. but it's really quite hard to get there, and the likelihood you're ever going to play that quiet is pretty remote, especially if we're playing the power kit. And when it comes to sound difference between the center of the drum and the edge, there does seem to be a slight difference, but not the kind you'd see on an acoustic kit, not to the same degree. So if I hit each surface at the same volume, we do see some difference in there, but I'm not sure if it's just a volume difference or an actual sample sound difference. Rim shots also sound really nice. They sound great. And they just feel great as well on this edge. Toms are nice and sensitive as well, and of course you can adjust said sensitivity in the interface. A feature I only discovered recently was that you can change how you change from kit to kit. Out of the box, you have to swipe like this to get the kit to change. However, you can also change in the settings to just press the button, and I think that is much better. But I do have one main gripe about the interface and how the kits load, which is the load time. And I think I've been spoilt by kits I've had in the past. It takes a little bit of time to load the actual drum kit. And if you say change a kit by accident or are just trying to move through different drum kits, yes, you can select up at the top and then go through the list there, but sometimes it's not that intuitive. Especially if you're in a live situation, that can really throw things off. Not that you really want to be changing kits during a live situation, but you never know. Things can happen, especially maybe if you're moving through a set list and you're changing kits and stuff and you're waiting for things to change, or you do something by accident and then something starts loading when you don't want it to. So I feel like maybe there's a better way of doing things, maybe there isn't. I didn't build the drum kit. My theory as to why there are loading times is because this drum kit is more sample based opposed to algorithmic. That sounds very technical, doesn't it? But basically it just means it's using all samples. Every volume, every little thing is samples instead of an algorithm taking one sound and then changing it to call it a different volume or a different sound. Does that make sense? No? Good. Okay, continuing. One thing I do really like is the fact that this touch screen is much more sensitive, more a modern touchscreen, one that is really responsive, just like a phone screen. In the other kits, like the 3X, it is still a touchscreen, but it is a lot less sensitive and a bit more clunky, and it's not in colour either. So I do really quite like that side of things. I like that you can adjust the brightness. I like that you can just adapt things to a certain extent to how you want. Adding on to the point I made earlier about not being able to easily turn the drum kit off by accident, you can also lock the screen. So you can actually go into here and touch lock. So now shouldn't do a thing. But then you can just do this and it unlocks it again. Love that. Something I did forget to mention earlier is that you can connect this kit via Bluetooth to whatever device you like, which means you can play music off of whatever device and you can play back to it, which I used as I was rehearsing for a gig the other day, and it's fantastic. It's so useful. Oh, it's so good. Along the bottom we've got other things you'd expect to see, so things like tuning. You can also, remember, dampen and tune specific drums, which is something I really like. You can also then go into the main settings so you can really fine tune how these drums sound. Then you can also customize images for the backgrounds of each kit as you design them as well, so that's pretty cool too. Now, something I know that is probably quite difficult to do with such a small interface and screen is having tabs at the bottom, so your instrument tune levels and such. You have to press it on and off again. So even if you were to go here and then go into the menu and mess with something like this, when you go home again, that tab is still up. And I feel like it would be better if everything just cleaned itself again, so you had an easy just reset button for everything. Another big thing that I wish was slightly different with almost all the EFNOTE kits, to be honest, is the fact that they navigate using the dials and buttons at the bottom as well as the touchscreen. I think it would be beneficial, especially for things like a mixer, if you're changing the levels of things, especially while you're trying to play. I think it'd still be better to have more of an analog actual mixing desk option there available to you, so you can just adjust in real time. Especially if you're playing a big gig and maybe your fingers and hands and stuff are getting sweaty, or you've locked the touch screen so you'd have to press the button and then try and find your way through it while doing everything, whereas you could just have a little mixing desk and go and then it would be sorted. Yes, you could argue that you could sort that all out in soundcheck and that's what soundcheck's for, but you never know. Nice and easy option to record yourself, sort out levels for individual drums, tuning, and then you can also alter the drum itself. Moving on to the metronome, our Lord and Saviour, the metronome. I like that you can store different BPMs as their own little thing. Something that does throw me quite a lot with this is the combination of whether you should be using the dial, the button, or whether you should be pressing the actual screen. So for example, here with the quarter note, I would have thought, oh, I just press this and it will change up and down to different note values, but no, you have to dial it in using the knob, which I feel like it would be more intuitive if you either just stuck to having a touch screen or having an analog tactile interface. There's also a different range of sounds for your metronome, and I personally wish there was a count, a physical count of a person. I know most people don't get along with one ear being yelled in their ears, but I personally really get along with it, so I wish it were there. But in the grand scheme of things, these are quite small individual gripes that I've got that you probably won't have. Let's talk about how this thing looks, because it looks pretty cool, especially from a distance. And again, if this thing is built for playing big gigs, playing gigs in general, most people are going to see this from afar. But once you get a little bit closer up to this silver sparkliness, you'll notice the kind of edge of the laminate on each drum. You can very clearly see how it's been put on, and I think it would have been really good to see them put a little bit more love and energy into getting these drum kits to really feel expensive, because they are. And on the inside, the tech and everything surrounding it is fantastic and definitely worth that much. But when you look at a drum kit and you see that, it kind of takes away from it, especially as the person who's playing it and have experienced growing up with kits that are less expensive and seeing that as a common thing. You wouldn't really expect to see it in a pro kit like this. One other thing, just talking about the shells, is that this is currently the only colour you can get this drum kit in. I think it would benefit to at least get one in black, because it's going to be much more versatile for different performing purposes. Moving away from the shells, something I do think redeems the overall aesthetic of the kit, however, is having different types of cymbals. For example, you've got a dark cymbal over here, and I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever apart from to the aesthetic of this drum kit. They might have had a few dark crash samples going into this specifically, but it's mostly aesthetic. Same thing goes for the China cymbal. For me, it's really nice to have something that looks like a China cymbal on an electric kit. It does really help to sell the whole experience. You feel like you're really hitting a China, and that just helps sell the whole thing to me. The last point I want to make about the aesthetics, and actually more so about hardware, is that I'm really glad that they stuck with more traditional hardware. The stuff that comes with the Pro kit is pretty heavy duty, heavy wearing looking To me, it's pretty heavy, but I think I'd personally swap it out if I was doing a big, long tour. It probably would do the job, but you might want something a little bit heavier, and that's why I'm glad they stuck with this layout. The other lower kits, such as the 3X and I think the 3, have these different designed feet that kind of seem to mimic more of a rack, but also are a kind of hybrid between a rack and traditional stands. And I personally prefer the OGs. Call me old-fashioned, but that's what I like. But this stuff should certainly do the job, and it is easy to change out should you want to / need to. Overall, my response to this kit is overwhelmingly positive. The gripes I have are mostly aesthetic more than anything. A couple of tweaks perhaps to the interface might be more user-friendly, but for what I personally am using it for, it doesn't really need a lot to it, and I don't need most of what's actually in here because this kit's not even really for me. It's for professional touring drummers who have sound guys, hopefully, or are sound people, knowledgeable sound people themselves. And as much as I have some aesthetic gripes, having cables that are all separate and easy to access, I can see that as being extremely beneficial to any sound person. The kit sounds great. The kit feels great. The cymbals are responsive. The drums are dynamic and sensitive. The bass drum feels great and pretty realistic. Hi-hat, by the way, also really good. That's another gripe I have about electric kits sometimes. This thing sounds fantastic. I do wish the interface had a little bit more of a tactile side to it. I know we've got the 3 knobs, but I think it's just because I'm old-fashioned and I like having something I can actually just dial in much more easily than trying to go through a touchpad. But that being said, it is a very sensitive and easy to use touchpad. Other than a couple gripes about the aesthetics of this, it's a fantastic electric drum kit. It's really, really good. And I highly recommend, if you're in the market for something like this, you check out the EFNOTE Pro 7. And if it's too expensive for you, check out the rest of the range because they're still all high range kits. So for more information about all of these kits, check out the link down below. Also, if you want to help a girl out, then please subscribe to this channel and like this video and leave some comments about your thoughts about EFNOTE because I'd like to know what people think about this brand because it's pretty new. I don't know how many years old it is, but it is pretty fresh. So if you have any opinions, especially on Pro, then drop us a comment down below. Other than that, have a great day, happy playing, big love. Mwah.